So myself and Stephen got a taxi up to the police station, and Stephen went straight up to the father's house to get the father. So I went over to the police station, and Derek was lying flat on his face, and he was just moaning and turning. And he tried to pull himself underneath a car, what looked to be protecting his head, you know. And they were continuously beating him, I'd say 4 to 6 policemen, kicking him, telling him to get up, but he couldn't move. So this lady approached me, I don't know who she was, and she said to me, is he on drugs? And I said, no, he's not on drugs. I said, he hadn't even had a drink on him. I said, he's done absolutely nothing wrong. So she said, well, I said, can I go to him? I said, and she said, no. She said, when the ambulance comes, you can go in the ambulance with him. So I thought, well, thank God, at least he'll get away from them.
At approximately 06:07, first call came in for an ambulance from the Garda station requesting an ambulance. The ambulance left, went down to the station, and we were met by a guard at the door who said that there was no ambulance required, that the message must have been misinterpreted. We could hear a lot of screaming going on, and a guard appeared on the scene covered in blood on his face, shirt, trousers and hands. When I saw this, I asked the guard again, I said, are you sure there's no ambulance required here? He said no. So we reported back to station. As soon as we got back to station, we reported to Tar Street that Finglas Garda had sent in for an ambulance. The ambulance was denied, and we just got that logged. At approximately 07:13, just an hour after, the second call came in for an ambulance requested to the Garda station. We went down to the Garda station. We were admitted in by a uniformed guard into a room, and the patient was lying face down on the floor. There was a lot of hard blood right across the shoulder, on his neck, on the collar of his shirt, blood on the side of his scalp. And on examining this man, we found that he had a head wound. He didn't appear to be injured anywhere else. He appeared semi-conscious. I approached him and I identified myself as being an ambulance man and that we were going to take him to hospital. I asked him, did he want to go to hospital? And he nodded yes. I told him that we were going to try and get him up onto his feet and walk him out to assess how much consciousness he had. We carried him out to the ambulance, or assisted him out to the ambulance, where we rendered first aid and bandaged up the wound on his head, and we brought him to the Mater Hospital and handed him over to the casualty sister who was in charge.
Earlier that morning, another independent witness, milkman Pat Devoy, was in the vicinity of the Nissan Prairie.
We stopped there for about 2 minutes, probably, like, you know, a couple of minutes just, and that's all it would be. And they were beating the chap down on top of the head. Two guards were beating the chap down on top of the head, and there was a girl a bit hysterical, like, you know, of what was going on. Like, we didn't know what was happening. Like, they just kept beating this chap down on top of the head. So we drove on down the road. We came back up. They had the chap put into the car and took him away off. And they seemed to be pulling out the chap in the car when we were going up behind the guards. The guards weren't aware of us, obviously, like, you know. And they drove on the way up, and I just carried on to my milk round as normal.
The Gardaí are not prepared to be interviewed about this matter. However, we understand they will contend that Derek Fairbrother was aggressive and uncooperative towards them. In fact, they have issued a warrant for his arrest, for assault and for a driving offence.
Did Derek in any way provoke this attack?
No.
Did he behave in an aggressive way?
No,
Derek
definitely not, no.
If anything, he's a happy-going fella. He never causes any trouble whatsoever.
He's very fit and he's very strong.
Yes. But regarding trouble, he'd never get into trouble.
The first member of the Fairbrother family to arrive at Finglas Garda station was Noel Jr.
I got down in the corridor near the cell. I could hear Derek still screaming for help. At arriving, I saw a policeman coming out of the cell covered in blood and said his hands were sore. His hands was from his face, shirt, trousers, everything was covered in blood. The policeman tried to shove him into a different room. At that time, they actually grabbed me physically out and threw me onto the street and told me to get lost. I kept persisting again. I said to him, look, I want to see Derek, he's my brother, and I think he needs some kind of medical treatment.
If the police were questioning your brother,
right,
you didn't really have the right to see him.
Well, what we wanted to find out from the screams, and as a brother and family, I was worried from what the guards were saying, the physical state he was in.
There was a police doctor called.
At that time, I didn't see any police doctor. there around 6:15. I didn't see any police doctor arrive. I was only interested in his health at this stage. I did ask the person in charge again, which was very rude and abrupt, gave me no explanations. Again, I was very level-headed. I tried to explain who it was, and if there was no charge, why it was being held here. Again, he had no answer for me.
It was 9 days later that this matter came to public notice, when the subject was raised in the Dáil by Labour leader Dick Spring. Is it true that you gave the Department of Justice an ultimatum in that if they didn't sack the personnel concerned, you would bring the matter up in the Dáil?
Well, I did ask in my letter to the Minister for Justice, which was delivered on Friday of last week, I asked that these people should be suspended from the force immediately pending an investigation. I believe that the offences committed by them and the type of actions they had been guilty of warranted that at that time. I also indicated to the Minister for Justice that on Tuesday of this week I would be raising the matter in the House if I wasn't given some assurances in relation to it.
But at that stage you had only heard one side of the story.
I had heard in relation to the incident from the Fairbrother family and from independent witnesses who had no connection with the family. And because, as you say, I only had heard one side of the story, I gave the Department of Justice 4 days if they wanted to tell me their side of the story or the Guard side of the story.
I am concerned that Deputy Spring should have, in the Dáil, preempted the outcome of an inquiry by producing one-sided evidence, which obviously was available to him, by, if you like, dictating the way the public attitude towards this thing might very well develop, thereby prejudicing, I think, a fair and even and balanced trial or examination of the circumstances. I am also concerned, of course, that this may very well wind up in a court case. And I would not like to see the outcome of such a court case, if it comes about, being prejudiced by the debate that goes on before him.
Mr. Spring gathered the evidence himself and then presented it to the Secretary of the Department of Justice, giving him 4 days in which to act. It was only after that that he brought the matter up in the Dáil. Surely 4 days was enough for the Secretary to look into the matter and to perhaps take some action.
I can't account for what took place at the Department of Justice level, nor for what the Secretary of the Department of Justice did or could have done in a matter of 4 days. But I do know that there are set procedures laid down both in the Garda disciplinary regulations and under the provisions of the Garda Complaints Act for dealing with complaints. There are also procedures laid down for dealing with allegations of breaches of the criminal law, which I think might arise if the allegations were correct. And I think the system must be given time for those procedures to operate.
The system wouldn't have seemed to be in operation at all.
I don't accept that. Once the complaint is made, it must be dealt with. The Complaints Act sees to that, and I have no doubt, but that would be the position in this case, as it has been in every other case where a complaint against a member of the Garda Síochána has been made, which complaint was subject for inquiry under the Complaints Act.
That report from Hilary Orpen. 2 years ago this week, the Irish public voted no to divorce. At that time, there was a widespread political commitment to introduce a raft of family law reform to ease the acknowledged difficulties of separated people. But today, in spite of pledges of all-party support, the Alan Shatter Judicial Separation and Family Law Reform Bill is still at the committee stage. Many of the separated people who just